Okay, everyone, Shabbat Shalom. A big welcome to all of you. Welcome to the river, to all of you who are gathered here today on the live stream, and also to all of you who are watching after the fact. We pray that your Shabbat is or was blessed, depending where you are in the earth. And again, what an honor it is to be able to speak and to serve into the house, his house. If you're watching after the fact and you wish to come and join us live on the live stream, we do gather every Shabbat at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if you're wondering how to access the live stream, just go over to riverbranchfellowship.com. Scroll down on the main homepage and there will be a link to subscribe to the weekly newsletter. Once you click on that, this little box should pop up. Just type in your first and last name and email, and every Friday you'll be sent the weekly newsletter, which not only has the login details for the weekly live stream, but also just, news and current things going on within our wider community. Do come and join us. We love to say hi to newcomers, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you on the live stream. Okay, A Servant's Heart, Part 4. Today is the penultimate part. We've got Serving Self today. And next week, we're going to conclude the series with what it looks like to serve Messiah and what is it that our Messiah is really looking for. We've covered a fair bit of ground on this series. We kicked it off with part 1, the desires of the heart, because the Apostle Paul does say that someone who seeks to be an overseer or to serve, essentially, seeks a noble task, as said in 1 Timothy. And we looked in the Timothy series as to the nature of that noble task. But as we've seen, there are various facets that if the desire of our heart is not in a good place, we can unwittingly be serving man or serving the system, and that ultimately these two things actually facilitate to serving self. And so the desire to want to serve is not the issue. The issue is, what place are we serving from? Are we serving from a place of hurt? Are we serving from a place of feeding self-worth? And, eventually, when that heart's desire is not in the correct place, it's only a matter of time before a lack of wisdom may creep in, sometimes even bad fruit, even if the initial fruit may seem good, quote unquote. Before we get into today's teaching regarding serving self, let's quickly recap what we covered last week when we looked at serving the system. We looked at Mark chapter 7, a very famous passage where Yeshua was chastising the religious system at that time for putting the traditions of men either equal to or even over the word of Elohim. And Yeshua was drawing upon a passage in Isaiah 29 to make his case. And we looked at, we did a bit of a deeper dive on Mark chapter 7 and what it's quoting, Isaiah 29. And the dynamics of when you honor him with your lips, but keep your heart far from him, that actually the outcome of that will be a form of spiritual delusion, that, the prophets and the seers will not be able to understand the scriptures, that they will have a spirit of deep sleep put over them, that it's even likened to spiritual drunkenness, that you do not have your wits about you. You're not able to think straight or even critically. And we looked at how the traditions of men actually cater to the lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, and pride of life. And that essentially serving the system will lead you to serving self. And so we looked at that and all the fruit that would come thereof. we looked at this principle that your flesh is already defiled, because Yeshua makes this statement, it's not what goes into the body that defiles it, but it's what comes out, and he lists these various things, wicked reasonings, murders, envies, wicked desires. All these things come from a place of self. And so, Yeshua was making a bold statement. It's only that which comes out that will defile you. We made the point. You are fallen. Your flesh is destined to die because your flesh is already defiled. We have statements like flesh and blood will not inherit the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom from heaven. And so how do we deal with, matters of quote unquote purity, especially as listed in the Torah? I made this bold statement that could cause knee-jerk reactions, that it's not the eating of unclean foods that actually defiles you if you're to apply Messiah's words. But in this particular example, if you know what clean and unclean is, and you choose to disregard what is laid down in the foundation of our faith, it's actually exposing that your heart is already defiled before you've even ingested the unclean food. Because what it's exposing is that you will not listen to accountability, you will not listen to Yah's authority. You're actually in a place of self and usurping. And so the rules of eating clean and unclean are actually exposing really where your heart is at, because it's the heart that's being judged, right? Our flesh has already been judged. You shall surely die. And so what is it that's left if the flesh is judged to die? Maybe there's a heart that could come through this. And so from the heels of that, I made the statement, the Torah commands are not there to sanctify that which is destined to die, i.e. your flesh. The Torah commands are there to expose where your heart is at. And once your heart has been exposed, there's now an opportunity that lays before you. Are you going to choose the path that Messiah showed? Are you going to choose accountability, responsibility, consequence? Are you going to go on this journey of heart circumcision? Or are you going to dig your heels in, and are you going to serve man, serve the system, and serve ultimately self? The Torah commands are not there to sanctify that which is defiled. The Torah commands are there for Yah to expose what is in your heart or what isn't in your heart. What is truly, because remember, the heart is desperately sick and wicked, but there is opportunity for a heart to be circumcised as given by the Torah. In fact, Deuteronomy 30 says that as we draw closer to the end of the age, when he's about to regather his house, that his people will remember his covenant. And where will they bring them those words to? It doesn't say they shall bring them into their flesh. It says they shall bring these words into their hearts, and they shall start to hear them and to do them. And that through this hearing and doing and this process, that the outcome of that is heart circumcision. And you need the Torah to kind of show the way to heart circumcision, if that makes sense. Just as the Apostle Paul would say that the Torah was a tutor to lead us unto Messiah. That's the goal of the Torah, is to lead us to a point that ultimately says, will you choose life or will you choose death? Now, if our flesh is destined to die, what is it that could live past this time domain? I would argue it's a circumcised heart. And so we looked at all these dynamics, especially as to how it regards to serving the system. The system will come under the guise of serving Elohim. The warning is not given of the unbeliever, it's given to those that are claim the faith, so to speak. The warnings that they will think they are doing Elohim a favor, so to speak, and in fact, it will persecute the true believers. And so the guise of the system comes as an angel of light, because it comes under the guise of serving Elohim. the system will focus on the flesh as opposed to the heart. You know, this outwardly appearance, this appearance of godliness, but denying the power therein. And essentially what it's trying to do is to sanctify that which is destined to die. You know, do this in the flesh. Don't do that in the flesh. Don't look like this. Don't sound like that. Keeping up this appearance, and you doing that at the expense of the real heart circumcision. You know, and so unfortunately, the system will put the focus on the flesh in the hope that the outcome is a circumcised heart. You know, so I do these things, therefore my heart is circumcised. And actually, a more biblical way of doing this is, let me go through the heart circumcision process, and an outcome will be that things are starting to look a little more sanctified than they did before. You know, we've got to get the outcome and the goal in the right order. We've got to get the horse before the cart. The system ultimately will cater to one's lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. These, you know, that we read in the book of 1 John of the fiery arrows of the enemy. These are his three arrows. Now, how these things play out may look different, but when you peel back the layers, you'll always find lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life at the root of things. And usually a combination, like a smorgasbord of these things all intertwined. And so remember, we're looking at this from the idea, the foundation was, what is your heart's desire? Lust has a very negative connotation in the English, and actually the Hebraic word or words used are neutral terms, and these can be directed towards what is life, and it can also be directed towards what is death ultimately. And so what do we desire? Do we desire that which is good, that which is of Elohim, or do we want to please ourselves, essentially? The system will cause you to make yourself as Elohim, ultimately. Because if you're rejecting his word and you're saying, I'm going to do it my way, you may as well be saying, I am God of my own life. And again, this is how the Torah exposes whether your heart is defiled or not. And because ultimately what's in your heart will come out, whether it be through words or whether it be through behavior. Hence why the Shema is hear and do. What is it that you're hearing? What is it that you're doing? And you need the two to come together in line with the desire of Elohim. And so here we are looking at serving self. As I said, serving man, serving the system, and serving self rarely come by themselves. In fact, I would argue they usually come as a package. But what's interesting, and hopefully what people are seeing, is that serving at the root of serving man and serving the system is actually serving self. Serving self kind of underpins the first two, serving man and serving the system. And all of this is underpinned by what is the desire of your heart. And so again, we're looking at this from a place of wanting to serve. This community, we put a strong emphasis into serving into one another and sharing in each other's burdens. And really what we're really asking is, what place are you doing that from? Is your desire in the right place? Because if it is, you may find that you're serving Messiah in each other. But if the desire is misdirected, you may find that you're actually serving self, and that is manifesting through serving the religious system and serving man. And again, this applies to all of us, whether we have an official position of service or whether we're married, single, and simply just serving into those around us, whether that be in the body or even those out of the body. We're all called to serve. We're all ambassadors of Yah, whether we like it or not. We all profess the faith. And so who are we truly serving, essentially, is what we're going through this series for. Okay. Serving self. That's not what I want to hear. We hear a lot of that, actually, don't we? 2 Timothy 4 verse 3 says, "For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears that will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions." Think their own desires, okay? "And they will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths." And so right off the bat, the reason we even have false teachers and false prophets is actually because of the people. It's the people's fault that there are charlatans out there. Because if the charlatans didn't have an ear that would listen to them, they would essentially go bust and go out of business. And so, yes, there is a greater accountability on those that would claim to serve the body. That goes without say. But there is still an accountability on the people themselves and what they choose to listen to. And so turning away from listening to the truth and wandering off into the mythos of religion is actually an outcome of misdirected desire. The outcome of wanting to suit my own desires. I want to hear what I want to hear. I want to hear what will placate to me. I want to hear what will make me feel what I want to feel. The outcome of that is false teachers and turning away from truth, and thus the leaven creeps into the house. If you look at what's quote unquote called the Deuteronomy 13 test, right? And it says that false prophets will come into the midst of the body. What does Yah say? He has allowed these to come into the body to expose what is in his people. I'm paraphrasing here, but go read the opening verses of Deuteronomy 13. Yah allows this stuff to come in to see what is in his people's heart. What is it that they desire? And so Paul is literally saying this is what happens, when that desire is misdirected, when they make the faith about themselves. I want to hear what I want to hear. And so the reason we even have charlatan preachers and teachers out there is actually because of the people. It's actually a form of judgment, as we will see. But at the very root of it is self. So don't blame the charlatans and the false teachers. Blame those that are not checking their desires. This is why it's so important. There is an accountability on the people themselves. So what do the people in self want to hear? I've put the title, that's better. That's what I want to hear. Isaiah 30. Now, the context of Isaiah 30, Judah knows that Babylon is knocking on the door, so to speak, and it's not looking good. And rather than repenting and relying on our Heavenly Father, they've come up with the bright idea to seek help from Egypt, okay? Now, those of you who know your Torah will know that there's a specific command that says you shall never return to Egypt. And I believe that goes further than geographically speaking. Okay, the children of Israel were not physically returning to Egypt, although eventually they would to a degree if you read in Jeremiah, but they're returning spiritually. They're seeking help from man. They're choosing to not repent and to not rely on Elohim and go, you know what, we're going to do it our way. So that's the context. For they are a rebellious people. Lying children unwilling to hear the instruction of Yah. He's speaking of his people here. Now, the word instruction in the Hebrew has connotations of accountability and discipline. Think of instructing the children. And so these children essentially have got their fingers are in their ear going, la, 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 I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear the accountability and the reproof. We want to do things our way. In fact, we're going to go to Egypt for help. So they're unwilling to hear the instruction of Yah, who say to the seers, do not see, and to the prophets, do not prophesy to us what is right. Speak to us smooth things, prophesy deceits. I want to hear what I want to hear. Leave the way, turn aside from the path. Let us hear no more about the Holy One of Israel. Now, if you understand what was going on historically, Judah, on the surface, on the outside level, they'd not rejected Yah as you would think on the outside, because they were still doing their sacrifices. They were still going to worship at the temple. But what was occurring is that what's known as syncretism was starting to creep in. They were mixing the worship of Yah with the worship of pagan gods. And so on the outside, on a very surface level, they were saying, they were still claiming the faith, is what I'm trying to say. They were not unbelievers, quote unquote. They were not atheistic, but what they were doing, they were allowing this syncretism, this foreign worship to creep into the faith. And essentially what they're saying is, we don't want to hear the words of the prophets. In fact, we want prophets to tell us what we want to hear. It's okay for me to worship Yah the way I'm worshiping. And so we see here that, and we'll get into this as we look at the book of Jude and an allusion made to Cain, but when you're serving self, eventually you will rewrite the faith according to your own desires, and you will create Elohim according to your own image. It's all self. Now, I've put a little note here. When asking for advice and counsel, are you really looking for advice and counsel? And what I mean by that is I've had people come to me in the past saying, hey, Michael, what say you on this? And I tell them what I genuinely think, and they get annoyed or they get butthurt. They're like, I don't want to hear that. And it's like, well, you wanted my opinion, you wanted my advice and my counsel. It's like, yeah, I did, but I don't want to hear that. And so really what I mean by that is, are you really asking for advice and counsel, or are you looking for someone to tickle your ears and go there, to pander to, say, maybe your victim mentality, or to tell you how hard done by you are, right? This is a very common thing, And so again, when you're asking for advice and counsel, is that what you're really asking for? Because if not, you may be falling into this category, and it may be exposing that actually you're looking to have self placated, as opposed to hearing someone's opinion or truth on a matter. This is rife, by the way. This is rife. I've had it where people have brought their 20-page PDF of whatever doctrine, right? And they go, Michael, what say you? And I just start doing what I do and go, well, what about this? What about that? And they get hurt that I'm not, the accusation would come, well, you're trying to tear down my thing. It's like, no, I'm not. You asked my opinion. I'm giving you my opinion. Oh, I see. You want me to praise you. Right? You want me to placate self. You want me to tell you, well done. Again, when asking for these things, what do we really want to hear? Do we want to hear truth, or do we want to hear something that will please us? And again, remember the driver of this series. This is, a servant's heart. Why are you serving? Why do you want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant? When you're serving into people and people are asking you for advice, be aware of these dynamics. Because people claim they want to hear the truth, but actually they just want to have self tickled. Okay? And hence, false teachers, false preachers, false prophets come into the body. A conspiracy of self. Welcome to the body today, by and large. Jeremiah 5:30, an appalling and horrible thing has happened in the land. So Jeremiah is chronologically a bit later than Isaiah, and the people didn't heed the warnings from Isaiah and the prophets, and so things had gotten a bit worse by this time. The prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests rule by their hand. My people love to have it so. But what will you do when the end comes? Now, I've put here, the text is not clear as to whose hand the priests rule by. There's a little ambiguity here in the Hebrew, and I believe it can be read both ways, that the prophets are prophesying falsely, and that the priests are ruling by the prophet's hand, or that the priests are ruling by their own hand. I believe both get to the same point. They're ruling by self. We know that the prophets had got to a point where they were prophesying peace when there was no peace, that they were prophesying divinations and delusions of their own heart, okay? And we know that the priesthood was corrupted and engaging into all kind of wonky behavior and operating in self-gain and treachery so that they could benefit. But here's the issue. Is the issue the false prophets or the priests ruling by their own hand? No, my people love to have it so. So the account that, again, there's a greater accountability on those that would claim to serve the body, but that doesn't mean that the people get off scot-free. There is an accountability on the people of choosing what they want to hear. And this is why it's so important for spiritual headship to be in its proper order in the family nucleus. Husbands, you will be held accountable to what prophets and what priests you're allowing to speak into your life, so to speak. You will be held accountable. Scripture backs it up. And so the question is, what will you do when the end comes? You know, which means that there's an end of the age application to this. You may go, well, Michael, I do listen to truth. I do listen to messages that convict me. I do listen to things that are biblically sound. Okay, wonderful. You've done the first half of the Shema, you're hearing. But we know that Shema is hear and do, hear and obey. And so let's look at a passage in Ezekiel 33. As for you, son of man, your people who talk together about you by the walls and at the doors of the houses say to one another, each to his brother, come and hear what the word is that comes from Yah. Now, I think we can all agree that Ezekiel was a true prophet, okay? I think we can also agree that Ezekiel didn't give a pandering message. Go read the book of Ezekiel. It's some of the most graphic and convicting prophecies in Scripture. I mean, really graphic. It gets into harlotry and, go read it. It's a tough message to hear, okay? And the people are saying, let's hear it. And they come to you as people come, and they sit before you as my people, and they hear what you say, but they will not do it. For with lustful talk in their mouths they act. Their heart is set on their gain. And so look, we're seeing where the issue is. It's the desire. It's lustful talk. Remember that lust, it's desire, okay? And it's in their mouths. Now, what does the mouth speak from? The overflow of the heart. And so you have a people here that actually have an appearance of godliness, but are denying the power therein. They're actually saying, I want to hear the words that come from prophet Ezekiel. And as I've just said, he gave a hard message. He gave a tough talk, but they heard and they did not do. Thus, they were not fulfilling the Shema, hear and do, hear and obey. Why am I raising this? But Michael, I do listen to truth. I don't listen to the false prophets and charlatans that are out there in the body. I do listen to teachers that are in accountability, and I do listen to the convicting messages. Wonderful. So did the people around Ezekiel. You know, I've been in an assembly in the past where you would hear a convicting message and nothing would change. You would hear the amens and the hallelujahs and all preach it, you know, and that kind of thing. And the next week, you're right back to where they were. I actually believe people almost have, call it an addiction to hearing a convicting message. And they think, well, I've heard all these convicting messages. I'm in the right place. You may be in the right place, hearing the right words, but what are you actually doing about it? Where is your heart's desire? Is your heart's desire to hear convicting messages, or is your heart's desire to walk a convicting message? And this is what was going on in Ezekiel's time. It goes on, and behold, you are to them like one who sings lustful songs with a beautiful voice and plays well on an instrument. It sounds good. And again, Ezekiel's message was very tough talk. Go read the book of Ezekiel. For they hear what you say, but they will not do it. And so, look, there's a lot of pretty good messages out there probably in the body. You know, there's some good stuff, but there's not a lot of doing. How do you know? Why does the bad fruit continue to happen in a place where truth is being spoken? There's a disconnect. It's because Shema is not being fulfilled. There's a lot of hearing. There's not a lot of doing. And why that disconnect? Self. I want to hear what I want to hear. It may be you want to hear a convicting message, but what is your heart's desire? When this comes, and come it will, then they will know that a prophet has been among them. Because again, like I said, go read the book of Ezekiel. It was brutal. It was a brutal message to hear. And the people, I guess what I'm trying to say is just because a message is convicting doesn't mean it's changing you. Having teachers, heaping teachers to tickle the ears may actually look like you listening to good teachers and hearing convicting messages. Oh, it's tickling that itch of yours for conviction. But what are you doing about it? And so now you get this hypocrisy. I can guarantee you the Pharisees could give a pretty convicting message. I can guarantee. In fact, Yeshua said, you guys lay heavy burdens. You can imply that maybe there was some, whacking conviction on there. But they were not willing to lift those burdens themselves. Do you see what's going on? And all of this, again, there's an accountability being given to the people as to what they're listening to. Because it exposes where your heart's desire is at. Okay. Let's look at a warning to the house. We're going to look at a good chunk of the book of Jude. The book of Jude is a very small book that packs one of the heaviest punches in scripture, especially when you understand what it's referring to. And again, we're going to look at this from the angle of, false teachers coming into the body and what it exposes in the people. Does it expose wanting to serve Elohim, or does it actually expose self? Because again, nothing new under the sun. As we're going to see, Jude is basically quoting or paraphrasing passages in Torah and the prophets, and it was going on in Jude's time in the first century, and it's absolutely going on in our time today. In fact, we're living the fruit of the warnings of the book of Jude, having not been heeded. So, Jude 1 verse 3, Beloved, although I was very eager to write to you about our common salvation, I found it necessary to write, appealing to you to contend for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. And so there's this thing, people have the faith, but it needs to be contended for. Why? For certain people have crept in unnoticed, who long ago were designated for this condemnation. Ungodly people who pervert the grace of our Elohim into sensuality and deny our only ruler and master, Yeshua Messiah. Now, the book of Jude just says certain people. If you look at 2 Peter chapter 2, because 2 Peter chapter 2 is essentially a paraphrase of the book of Jude. Both passages paraphrase each other, but in some areas, one passage gives greater detail than, say, the other passage. The 2 Peter passage actually says that these certain people are false prophets that crept into the body back then, and that now false teachers will come from our midst. Okay, so Jude is just saying certain people, but Peter's specifying these are false prophets and teachers that will come from our midst. Now, because of these false teachers and false prophets coming in, Peter says that the way of truth will be evil spoken of. The truth, the faith will be slandered. There will be a bad witness that goes out because of these false teachers and false prophets that have crept into the body. And we see what that looked like in the time of the prophets. It ended in judgment, okay? It ended in captivity. Why? Because the so-called people of Yah engaged in all kinds of wicked behavior and dragged the name of Elohim through the mud in front of all the other nations. That was going on in the time of the apostles, and it's definitely going on now. Now, why are these false prophets and teachers coming into the body? We have to understand this. This is not false teachers and prophets going preying on the people, so to speak. Well, there could be a bit of that, but why do these things come into the body in the first place? Because of the people. You and I have a responsibility to seek truth, no matter the cost of that truth or whether we like it or not. And so what Jude is essentially saying, and 2 Peter, these false teachers and prophets will come in because the house of Elohim has got misdirected desires. They want their ears tickled. It says that these people creeping in are ungodly. Now, when we think ungodly, like we just conjure up this whitewashed religious idea of what it means to be godly and ungodly. The Greek here, asebes, it actually means irreverent, destitute of the reverential awe towards God, condemning God by extension. And so the extension of irreverence, the outcome of irreverence, is that it leads to impiousness and wickedness. But so when you read ungodly in your English, you need to think they do not have the fear of Elohim. Now, we know the fear of Elohim is what? The beginning of wisdom and understanding. So if you don't have a fear of Elohim, you do not desire Elohim, the outcome of that will be irreverence. And that irreverence will lead, it's a form of self. Because if you don't fear Yah, you watch the bad behavior that comes out from this. All of the bad behavior going on in the body, you can attribute to a lack of the fear of Yah. Because if you feared Yah, you would not condemn your brother or sister. You would not see the behavior going on. And so we're seeing quite a few things here already, just in these verses. That irreverence, a lack of the fear of Elohim, leads to ungodliness, impiousness, wickedness, because the people are looking at self. I want self to be placated to. And the outcome then means that false prophets and false teachers will come in. And the outcome of that is that you pervert the grace or favor of Elohim into sensuality. Now, again, when you think sensuality, you're thinking physical, bodily, maybe sexual. What the Greek is trying to capture here is that which is of the flesh, that which is physical almost. So again, think this outward expression of what looks good, but denying the power lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life, what we covered in the previous parts, okay? That leads to, this is what the sensuality is referring to. And the outcome of that is that you deny Messiah. Now, hear me when I say this. I believe that what Jude is saying is you're not denying him with your words, but you're denying him with your actions. Again, what happened to the house of Israel in the past? Focused on self, lack of the fear of Elohim, which allowed false prophets and teachers to come in, which meant that the name of Yah was dragged through the mud in front of all the nations. So, and they were claiming to worship him, but their hearts were far from him. So that with their mouth, they showed much love, but actually in their actions, they were denying the master. Do you see what's going on here? And Jude is saying, watch out, it's going to happen again. It's going to happen again. Now, I want to remind you, although that you once fully knew it. Like, so he's reminding them, you know this stuff, guys, and I'm having to remind you of this. You're slipping away. Your faith is getting diluted. Although you once fully knew it, that Yeshua, who saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who did not believe. So it's referring to the generation, the first generation in the wilderness. Now, you may be going, Yeshua, okay, look, there's two sources of Greek manuscripts. One will say Elohim in this. The other one says Yeshua. So there's an understanding of who your Messiah was in the early assemblies, okay? I'll leave it at that, but that's not a typo. It just depends which Greek manuscript you're translating from. It's no different when Paul says that, you know, the assembly in the wilderness that followed the rock that gave them waters, and that rock was Messiah. It's the same understanding. Now he's saying that Elohim saved the people out of the land of Egypt, but he did destroy those who did not believe. And if you go read Hebrews 3 and 4, again, it goes on about the first generation in the wilderness, that unbelief led to disobedience. It equates unbelief to disobedience. And so a lack of faith, a lack of the fear of Elohim will eventually lead to disobedience. Why? Because you've made yourself your own God. You're saying, I don't need to hear the covenant. I don't need to hear this. I'm going to do it my way. And this is exactly what the people in the wilderness were doing. They hadn't forgotten who Elohim was. They professed to believe in him, but they denied him through their actions, did they not? And Jude is saying, this is coming back around, guys. It happened in the wilderness. It's happened with the prophets. It's happening in our time, and it's going to happen now, and here we are. So judgment. He's going to give now some examples. The angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, so usurping self, but left their proper dwelling, he is kept in eternal chains and the gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. So he's saying that self leads to authority crisis, if you want to call it that. And we'll get to that in a bit. He's likening essentially the first generation in the wilderness to the angels who did not keep their own position of authority. He's drawing a parallel. It's a hard message, right? It's a hard message. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. So, look, again, he's giving a different example. And what's at the root of all of these? Desire. Desire. What is it that you desire? Because Sodom and Gomorrah wanted some unnatural stuff. The angels, they did not desire to remain in their position of authority. They desired something else. What did the first generation of the wilderness desire? They were looking back to Egypt. They did not want to do things Elohim's way. And so we see, because they were in a place of self, an outcome of that was rejecting authority, his authority. You're essentially going, I'm going to do this my way. It's what the people did. It's what these angels did. I'm going to do this my way. Yet, in like manner, so Jude is saying, like these three examples I've just given you, the first generation, the angels of Genesis 6, and Sodom and Gomorrah, like these people, i.e., the false teachers, the false prophets coming into the body, that rely on their dreams, they defile the flesh, they reject authority, and blaspheme the glorious ones. Okay? Let's break this down. Remember that Jude is saying these certain people have come in, these false teachers, these false prophets. Apparently they rely on their dreams. I believe there's an allusion to Jeremiah 23 here, where it says, woe to the false prophets who say, I have had a dream, but Yah's not sent the dream, and they prophesy peace, but there's no peace. In fact, he's saying that these are prophesying the delusions of their own heart, okay? And so through what they're prophesying, their own heart, their self-based hearts, they're only able to do that because the people are in a place of self themselves. And the outcome of this, they will reject authority and they will blaspheme the glorious ones. Now, think of the glorious ones as those in positions of authority. We'll get to this in a bit. But what does it mean to blaspheme? Because again, in the English, you're probably thinking, using God as a curse word. That's not what the Greek is saying. You're probably thinking, they're preaching error. That's not what the Greek is saying. Blasphemeo in the Greek means to revile, to speak abusively against, to malign, to vilify, to injure someone's reputation, to defame. Look at this, to speak irreverently. Now, what did we see that was an outcome of being in self? Being irreverent. Remember it said ungodly, but actually ungodly means irreverent. This is Lashon Hara, evil speech, not blasphemy in the Catholic sense, okay? This is to malign. So these false teachers, these false prophets, they malign those in positions of authority. What did the wilderness generation do? They rejected authority and maligned Moshe and Aaron, did they not? He's going to give an example. When the archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, the master rebuke you. This is the example that Jude is giving for what it means to blaspheme those in authority. He says Michael did not vilify the adversary. This rocks people's boats. That's the example given. And there's a whole thing, but essentially let me phrase it this way. Who allows the adversary to be in the place he's in? It's Elohim that has allowed the adversary to be in the position he's in. Elohim has allowed this. When is the adversary going to be judged? Has judgment already been pronounced on the adversary? Yes, it was pronounced on him back at the fall of man, at the garden. And we know from the book of Revelation that his judgment is fulfilled at the end of the millennial reign. Michael knew this, Michael the archangel, and he's saying, Yah's already dealt with you. I'm not going to presume to come against what Yah has allowed. Let Yah deal with it. You're Yah's problem, not mine. It's a very simplified way of looking at it. But Jude is giving a very powerful example because he's saying that these false teachers will speak evil of those in positions of authority. And the example he gives is Even Michael the archangel did not speak against the adversary. But these people vilify, speak against, malign, defame, they're irreverent, all that they do not understand. And they are destroyed by all that they, like unreasoning animals, understand instinctively. So, look, we know in John 1 verse 5, it says that the darkness does not comprehend or overcome the light. Okay, and this is where the idea that darkness scatters in front of the light. The Greek has a dual meaning there. It can mean to comprehend. The literal Greek means to lay. The darkness does not lay hold of the light. And that can also mean to lay hold of with the mind, to be able to perceive. And so I've put here that the darkness does not comprehend the light. Have you ever found yourself talking to someone, you're trying to speak truth as best as you can, and you're watching the words bounce off their forehead? Because the darkness does not comprehend, it does not, and hence why it scatters, okay? So they blaspheme, they speak against that which they do not understand. And if you're in a state of self, usually you will come against that which is true, that which is of Elohim. You vilify it, you speak against it. This is why servant leadership usually gets the butt of accusations. When dealing with people, you're seeing this pan out. And what they do understand instinctively, they're like unreasoning animals. This is why it's saying that these people cannot critically think. They're not able to actually see. They're acting impulsively, aggressively. Why? Because they're in a state of acting by flesh, anger, jumping the gun, so to speak. And what they do understand, it destroys them. This is how you end up with a Torah terrorist, by the way. They understand something instinctively, but they are destroyed by it. They whack everybody over the head with it, if that makes sense. And so these false teachers and false prophets are coming in and they're blaspheming that which they don't know. They're speaking ill. They're speaking irreverently. This is why some of you will listen to a teaching that's out there and you'll go, do they not hear what they're saying? They're speaking lies, untruths, and no matter what you say to them, you're watching the words bounce off their heads. This is what's going on. And this is happening because the people love it so. Self. Their desire is self, not Elohim. Woe to them, for they have walked in the way of Cain and abandoned themselves for the sake of gain to Balaam's error and perished in Korah's rebellion. Now, we've dealt with Korah's rebellion a couple of parts ago, and we said that Korah was serving the people, but that was actually a guise, right? The real reason, he was serving self. He wanted the priesthood, but it was done under the illusion and under the guise of serving the people. And because he's serving self, he's setting up his own form of serving the body, essentially. So we've dealt with Korah. What was Balaam? Balaam wanted a paycheck, essentially. It's really interesting because with Balaam, what you're seeing is that it's done under the guise of serving Elohim. Remember the story of Balaam? He says, I cannot speak against what Yah is saying. He's actually speaking to Yah, remember, Balaam is. And he's saying, I can't speak against it. But what does he do? He says, but let me help you go around the word of Yah. I can't break it, but I can help you go around it. Send in the women. See what happens. He wanted his paycheck. And what's ironic about Balaam, when he first asks Yah, should I go there? Yah says, don't do it. Don't go. But Balaam keeps asking, does he not? Well, how about now? Can I go now? Can I go now? And Yah says, you know what? Go. It's almost like Yah saying, okay, have your heart's desire. I told you not to go, but you're going to go and do it anyway. Off you go. Given over to the delusion of his own heart, given over to his own wicked desires. And what's ironic is that Balaam, go read his prophecies. He gives a couple of awesome prophecies, but he says, Balaam, the prophet whose eyes are open. And we know the story. He couldn't even see the messenger of Yah stood in the way, but the donkey could. And so you see a hypocrisy. You see delusions of grandeur, if you want to call it that. He's in self. He wanted to go. He wanted to get paid. And he's going around the word of Yah to do so. Very interesting. And he did it all under the guise of serving Elohim. All under the guise. It was all self. Self. What did Cain do? Cain served self. Actually, before we get to Cain, let's remember what Balaam did. He was serving the pagan kings as well, was he not? Because it was the kings of the foreign nations that wanted Balaam's service. And Balaam's saying, well, I can't break the word of Yah, but I really want to get paid. I'm going to show you how to go around it. He's serving pagan kings in Yah's name. Think about that. Does this sound like something going on today? You know, like so-called religious, spiritual figures serving in high political positions. I'll leave that there. Nothing new under the sun. But let's get to Cain. What did Cain do? Go read the story. I believe Yah holds Cain to account, does he not? He says, you know to do the good. He accepts Abel's offering, but he doesn't accept Cain's, right? And Yah says as part of his reproof, you know the good way. You know how to do good, which means that Cain was worshiping Yah as he saw fit. And he says to Cain, by the way, sin has a desire for you and you must master it. Oh, desire. Teshukah is the Hebrew there. It's a desire. He's saying, Cain, you need to master your desires or else sin is going to come creeping in. So Yah's saying to him, you need to master this. You need to get your desires in check or you will become a slave to what you desire. But the issue with Cain is that he knew the good way, but he chose not to do it. He worshipped Yah as he saw fit. I'm going to worship Yah how I want. So because Cain was in a place of self, he essentially created the worship of Elohim to his own image. And the outcome of that, well, we know the story, murder. Cain's state of self led him to murdering his brother, literal murder. And so what do all of these three have in common? Self. Self. Worshipping Yah as you see fit and murdering those that show you up. Right? Balaam, serving self in the name of Yah and serving pagan kings in the name of Yah and showing them, giving the illusion that he's some great prophet. Korah, illusion of serving the people, but really it was all about him. All of these ended in death, by the way. Death. These are hidden reefs at your love feasts as they feast with you without fear. Again, irreverence. Shepherds feeding themselves, waterless clouds. Clouds are supposed to give life-giving waters, but they have no water. Think wheat and tares here. A tree that does not bear good fruit. Swept along by winds. Paul would say the winds of endless doctrines in Ephesians. Fruitless trees in late autumn when they're supposed to give fruit. Twice dead, uprooted. They feast with you. It's your brother. It's your sister. They're not devil horns and lasers and stuff and pitchforks. They're hidden reefs. Look, a hidden reef will shipwreck. That's what Jude is saying. It's harbor and ship analogy. You don't want to bring a ship in where there's a hidden reef because it will shipwreck it, i.e., you and your faith. We'll get back to this, the shipwrecking of faith. Wild waves of the sea, casting up the foam of their own shame, wandering stars for whom the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved forever. I mean, I know this is really extreme, but Jude is saying this is happened. It happened then, it was happening in his day, and it's going to be happening now. And it's going to come from our midst. And the reason it's coming from our midst is because our desire's in the wrong place. We're focused on self. These are grumblers, i.e. the first generation of the wilderness, which he alluded to earlier. Malcontents, following their own sinful desires. It's a desire problem. They are loudmouth boasters, showing favoritism to gain advantage. Self, 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 self. But you must remember, beloved, the predictions of the apostles of our Master Yeshua Messiah. They said to you in the last time, there will be scoffers following their own ungodly passions. These scoffers are not atheists. He's saying these are the people coming from within the body, scoffing. And they're following their own, again, ungodly. The word there is eusebia, irreverent, destitute of the reverential awe towards God. Like, these have no fear of Elohim, though they profess the faith. Why? Because they're in a state of self. And because the body, by and large, is also in a state of self, it's creating its own conspiracy of self echo chamber. And this is what's allowing all this leaven to creep into the house. We're all on the stand here. It is these who cause divisions, worldly people devoid of the Spirit. That's the outcome. Divisions. And Yah allows this to come in to expose what's in people's hearts. Again, think Deuteronomy 13. Why is this stuff allowed to creep in? To expose the heart of his people. This is why when it says, woe to those that bring division, but divisions are necessary to expose, to show where people are truly at, but woe to those by which the division or stumbling block comes by. Devoid of the Spirit. They're not being led by the Spirit of Elohim, they're being led by self. Worldly people, the word there, worldly, again, think lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. And remember what we've covered, because all today's teaching is built upon the last few teachings. It all feeds into it. Remember that serving the system, lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life, worldliness, serving man. We know in Matthew chapters 5 or 6, I think. Matthew 7. There will be those that say, Master, Master, did we not do all these things in your name? Cast out demons and did all this stuff. And what does he say to them? I don't even know you. I don't know you. Why? Because they were devoid of the Spirit. They were doing their own thing in his name. Again, remember, it comes under the guise of serving Elohim. Remember in an ancient Hebrew wedding, you had the friend of the groom that would pass the messages between the groom and the bride. That's the type and shadow of the Ruach of Elohim. This is why these people did not know the master, or the master did not know them. Devoid of the Ruach. Thus they didn't know the groom, though they professed the groom's name. And all of this, the warning is, this stuff is going to come in because the people love it so. It's a tough message. Whatever false charlatan teachers out there, ask yourself, why are they allowed to be there? Someone's putting money in their pockets. I want to quickly revisit a couple of passages in Timothy. As I urged you when I was going to Macedonia, remain at Ephesus so that you may charge certain persons not to teach any different doctrine, nor to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies. This word myths, remember what we covered earlier, that there will come a time in the end where the people will heap upon themselves teachers to tickle the ears, and the outcome of that is irreverence towards Elohim and being led into myths. And now endless genealogies. You know, in Titus 1, it says endless genealogies and arguments about the Torah, which promote speculations rather than the stewardship from Elohim that is by faith. Again, why do you even get arguments about the Torah? Why do you even get arguments about scripture? It's because of self. And you're focusing on this outwardly stuff rather the stewardship from Elohim that is by faith, which means you're actually making a mockery of the faith when you're in this place of self. The aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. A faith that is sincere means without hypocrisy. A good conscience, this is a heart matter. Now, the whole point of 1 Timothy is about how to serve in accordance to his order. Again, we've done the teaching on 1 Timothy. So the goal of everything that Paul is going to say is a true faith, a sincere faith, one without hypocrisy, one that flows from a pure heart, one that doesn't come from self. He goes on further down the chapter, certain persons, by swerving from these, swerving from what? Well, the pure heart, the good conscience, the sincere faith. If you swerve from that by being caught up in this outwardly stuff, they've wandered away into vain discussion, desiring to be teachers of the law, of the Torah, without understanding either what they are saying or the things about which they make confident assertions. Look, desire. What is your heart's desire? Now, those who desire to be overseers desire a noble thing, as Paul would say. So what's the real issue here? It's where the desire is coming from and what is it feeding? Is it a true, sincere, pure desire, or is it one to feed self? And look, they don't understand what they're saying or about what they make confident assertions. They sound like they know their stuff. And thus Isaiah 29 plays out yet again. Praise him with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. What's the outcome? A spirit of delusion. Welcome to vast proportions of teachings available online today. And why is that stuff even there? Is to expose you and I. What's our desire? This charge I entrust to you, Timothy, my child, in accordance with the prophecies previously made about you, that by them you may wage the good warfare. What's the warfare here? Is it battling the demons and slaying the dragons and dealing with those awful Roman rainbow-colored people? No, the context of this warfare is false teachers coming within the body. That's the battleground. The battleground is here, not out there. Holding faith and a good conscience. Again, what was the goal of this thing? A sincere faith, a pure heart. By rejecting this, what? The faith, the good conscience, the pure heart, getting caught up in all these arguments about scripture. Me. I want to be this teacher, that teacher. Some have made shipwreck of their faith. When we think of shipwrecking one's faith, you think of someone generally becoming an atheist or going off into like Buddhism or something. That's not what Paul is saying. Shipwrecking your faith, you're still claiming the true faith, but you're caught in a state of self. That's the shipwrecking of your faith. By rejecting a good conscience, a pure heart, a sincere faith, you end up in a place of being shipwrecked. And remember what Jude was saying. These hidden reefs are in your midst. In fact, the hidden reef, you may saw that person in the mirror. It could be you. Whoops. Among whom are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have handed over to Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme. Again, the word blasphemeo does not mean to use God as a curse word or to teach heresy. Even that's like heresy means divisions. That's what a heretic does. Someone who causes division, that's a heretic by the Greek. This word blaspheme, to revile, to speak abusively against, to malign, to vilify, to injure someone's reputation, like that, to speak irreverently. The evil tongue. So irreverence, like, and the outcome of rejecting authority. So Paul is saying there's people that will shipwreck their faith. Hopefully you now understand what that means. And he's making this example of these two individuals. And Paul is saying he handed them over to Satan. Now, we covered this in the First Timothy series, what it means to hand someone over. This means that there was a process and an event that Paul is able to speak of. These two guys were essentially put out the assembly. Go watch the First Timothy series, where in the first part where we deal with what this means, because he's referencing language used also in the book of Corinthians. But this Hymenaeus and Alexander were essentially put out the camp. Why? So they learned not to speak abusively and irreverently. They were coming in against, they were causing Lashon Hara. So Paul is reminding Timothy, you know, he's saying, do you remember these two guys? That's what I mean by shipwrecking their faith. This is something that Timothy was already aware of. Now in 2 Timothy, he's going to explain something as to the nature of what Hymenaeus and Alexander actually did. But look at the context. Do your best to present yourself to Elohim as one approved. Now, look, Timothy is a servant. This whole series is about what is the servant's heart that Elohim is looking for. And Paul is saying here, as one approved. Now, the word dokimos, tested, proven acceptable, used of gold and silver, after sure examination and trial by fire, verifiably approved. That's what it means to be approved. You've been tested by fire and you've been examined closely. A worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. Not just handling and swinging wildly this sword, rightly handling it. Avoid irreverent babble. Again, this irreverent thing is coming up, for it will lead people into more and more ungodliness. Again, asebeia. Ungodliness, the Greek actually is saying a lack of the fear of Elohim. So when you do not handle the word of truth correctly, because you're in a state of self, and you're picking and choosing what you want to hear from that word of truth, because you're in a state of self, it will lead people, the congregation, more and more into irreverence. A lack of the fear of Elohim, because that state of self will get others into a state of self. And it becomes this negative feedback loop, because the people want to hear what they want to hear. So a false teacher, preacher comes along and gives them what they want to hear. But because those people are feeding the self of the false teacher and you see how the two feed into each other's self. And their talk will spread like gangrene. Among them are, there you go, Hymenaeus, he makes an appearance again, and Philetus, who have swerved from the truth. Now, what was the example? What does it mean to shipwreck your faith? It doesn't mean to reject Elohim. It means to do the faith in a state of self, essentially. Saying that the resurrection has already happened, they are upsetting the faith of some. And so it's not that they were teaching false doctrine, but what was it? What we read in First Timothy, they were irreverent. They were speaking evilly against you. I can assure you what was going on here, because I've had to deal with this kind of behavior before. But what will happen is someone has an opinion. I think we should do this. And I'll use myself as the example. People come to me with their weird and wonderful doctrines, and fine, have your opinion. I'm not so much concerned about what your opinion on a doctrine is. What I'm concerned about is how are you going to go about it, brother, sister? Are you now going to start drawing disciples unto yourself? Are you now going to start going against the Yah-given prescribed order of things? Because you're free to have your opinion. But how are you going to go about it? And what were Hymenaeus and Alexander saying in 1 Timothy? They were speaking evilly, especially irreverently. That was the issue. In fact, let's go there. He handed them over to Satan for the destruction of their flesh. Why? So they may learn not to revile and speak abusively against. And this is usually against Yah-given authority. Think Korah. Korah had an idea or two, did he not, about how things should be run? I can assure you Moshe was like, you can have your opinion, but how are you going to go about it? We saw how it went, right? Now, here's what's key here. The text doesn't say that these individuals proclaim themselves as teachers. It doesn't say that they proclaim themselves as teachers. Why do I say this? People will have their weird and wonderful ideas, and they'll have their 20-page PDFs, and they'll want you to disseminate their 20-page PDF to the rest of the congregation. And you say no. You're willing to go through the PDF. I'm using a more modern example. You're willing to go into a process of discipleship and contending and hashing these things out. But then when you start saying this doesn't hold to biblical truth, and even if it does, the way you're going about it, brother, sister, is frankly appalling, they get upset. I've had to say to people, if you want to, so you're proclaiming yourself a teacher, and they go, oh, no. I'm like, well, you kind of are. You want your PDF and teaching to be disseminated in the wider assembly. That makes you a teacher. Oh, no, I'm not a teacher. Well, what are you doing then, putting a teaching together? If you want to be a teacher, you're going to have the accountability and you're going to bear the responsibility of what that means. You can now start taking the emails from people, wanting counsel. How about you start now giving biblical counsel? Start speaking into people's lives and giving marriage counsel. How about, oh, no, I'm not a teacher. Well, why is your teaching now needing to be disseminated? Oh, you don't like that I'm actually critically assessing your teaching. Do you see where I'm going with this? Hymenaeus and Philetus, it doesn't say they proclaimed themselves as teachers, but they were disseminating their views and their ideas. You can't have the goodie bag without the accountability and the responsibility, is what I'm trying to say. If you want yourself, your teaching or opinion and that to go out, you bring it before an accountable place. You let it be hashed out. Let's see if we can poke holes through it before it's disseminated across to the body. Oh, and you're going to go do this the accountable way. Oh, no, I'm not a teacher. You don't get to have it both ways. Why am I saying this? Because I've experienced these dynamics a few times now. I believe this is what was going on with Hymenaeus and Philetus. Paul was less concerned about what they were saying. It's how are you going about it, brother? Because right now, all I can see is that you're upsetting and shipwrecking the faith of others. And remember what it means to have your faith shipwrecked. You are now in a place of self. Your faith is insincere and is coming from a place of hypocrisy. Not that you've rejected God, The fear of Yah is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. Elsewhere, it says the fear of Yah is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Again, instruction is a discipline, accountability term. A lack of wisdom and its ensuing bad fruit is a telltale sign that someone is in a place of self. Everything, I don't know if people notice, but one of the common threads through everything we've covered today is what the English translation calls blasphemy. But that actually what the word is really saying, irreverence, a lack of the fear of Yah. It's a place of self. You've made yourself your own God of your own faith. And this is what we see now in vast proportions of the body. People want to, look, there's a lot of people that want to serve, and their intent may be noble in the sense of, well, I want to help, but they're not doing it in a biblical fashion. They're not doing it with wisdom and insight. And so are people serving from a place of folly, and is folly spreading throughout the body despite good intentions? Remember the title of this series, A Servant's Heart. And so let's wrap up. Irreverence, a lack of the fear of Yah, seems to be a common attribute to serving self. I've had people come to me with their weird and wonderful doctrines, using that example again. And they've literally said they'd be willing to divide a fellowship or a discipleship group in the name of so-called truth. They were willing to do that if it meant truth could go out. And I'm like, are you hearing yourself? You're willing to cause division because you think you know a thing or two. The lack of the fear of Elohim manifests itself in so many different ways. We could do a whole teaching on how it looks like in the flesh. Being quick to speak your counsel into someone's life is a sign that you do not fear Elohim as you should. Let's get really subtle here. People are very quick to speak into each other's lives. Whoa, 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 whoa. Do you know the person? Do you know the context of their situation? Have you actually gone through this? Or do you think now you know everything because you know a Torah portion or two? Being quick to speak into someone's life at the very best is naivety. At the very best, at the very worst, it's a lack of the fear of Elohim. I've learned over the years to be slower and slower to speak into people's lives. Why? Because I fear him. And I don't want to speak something that is wrong into someone's life because that person is not mine. They're his. He died for them, not me. Irreverence, a lack of the fear of Elohim, is a common attribute to serving self. It will cause you to make yourself Elohim. You will, in fact, here we go. Serving self will lead to delusion. You will rewrite the word of Elohim according to you. This is how on the Christian riverbank, the front of the book has pretty much been ripped out. And this is how on the Judah side of the bank, they're essentially rewriting, they're getting rid of Messiah. It's a place of self. You will rewrite, and this rewriting of the word will cause you to do things by your own standard of righteousness. And so now you're on this performance treadmill of painting the outside of your tomb. And now you're in a place of focusing on the outside rather than the inside. It will cause you to create Elohim in your own image because you're in a place of self. It will cause you to think of yourself more highly than you ought. That one is rife. And that one can be very subtle as well. Self only, quote unquote, serves an authority when it agrees with it. This one, oh boy. When you're in a place of self, you will have the illusion of submitting to authority. But the minute that so-called authority does something you do not agree with, all of a sudden you find out whether you're in submission. Submission is only let me say this, submission is only submission when it's something you don't agree with or don't necessarily understand. Up until that point, it's agreement. And unfortunately, I see a lot of so-called submission, but actually it's just a guise for agreement. Look, I'm not saying that you should blindly submit and blindly follow. But if you truly believe that someone who's gone before you, like that there may be a vessel of Elohim, or that they, just because you don't agree with it or fully understand it, okay, I'm not saying blindly follow. Use your head, use your critical thought. But, look, wives will know this. Wives, submit to your husbands. Sometimes wives will be like, I don't fully get you, dear, but you know what? Fine. By the way, that goes both ways. When scripture says to the body, submit one to another in what? The fear of Messiah. If you cannot submit to one another, and I'm not talking blind submission to delusion here, okay, it may show that you do not fear Messiah. In fact, it does. Paul very clearly says, submit one another to one another in the fear of Messiah. So do not confuse agreement and submission. And boy, have I seen this. Someone will submit to you up until you disagree with them. Self will whitewash and blend in. And what I mean by blend in is they will come from within your midst. These are rocky reefs in your feasts, in your appointed time gatherings. It could be your brother, it could be your sister, it could be you. When there are siftings and crushings and divisions that occur within assemblies and stuff, people really seem to struggle with this thing of, but I thought I knew them. But it's so-and-so. They've been here for so long, or it's so-and-so. Like, I thought they had their house in order. It's so like, and they can't believe it. And it's like, it blends in. That's what I mean by that. And it will whitewash. It will have the appearance of godliness, but deny its power. Ultimately, self eventually leads to murder in all forms of the word. It starts off with character assassination. It starts off with evil speech, lashon hara, irreverent speech, right? Ungodliness, irreverence, a lack of the fear of Elohim. But Cain murdered his brother because he was in a state of self. The Pharisees murdered the King of Kings because they were too busy serving man and serving the system, which ultimately was serving self. It was about them. If you read in the Gospels that when the Pharisees are conspiring, they're saying this man is, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's going to upset this little agreement, this sweet deal we've got going with the Romans. And the people are not going to listen to us anymore. They're literally telling you, we're in a state of self and we're going to take out our quote unquote competition. We're going to kill him and we're going to use Rome to do so. Yeshua warns that towards the end of the age, It will be the believers thinking that they're doing Elohim a service that will flog you and eventually persecute you and murder you. Why? Self. All self. Now, I know today was a tough message, but I want to ask this question in finishing up today's teaching as a stepping stone for where we're going to pick up as to what it, because so far we've looked at the desire of the heart, serving man, serving the system, and now serving self. And we see how serving man and serving the system can all feed into what we've covered today. It ultimately serves self. What is Messiah looking for then? Because that's what we're going to look at next week. And so here's the question: is serving self a product of the fallen state? Is serving self a product of the fallen state? I'm going to give you the answer now, because then the real question comes in for next week. The answer is no. Serving self is not a product of the fallen state. If that was the case, Eve could not have been deceived. Eve was a glorified, unfallen human being, and the lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, and the pride of life was used to deceive her. And then she fell. The adversary, go do your homework. I believe he was a cherubim. It says Ezekiel outright said it. Anyway, definitely not a fallen state creature. And what does it say? That pride was found in him, so Yah cast him down from the Mount of Assembly. So if serving self is not a product of the fallen state, why the fallen state? And how does this relate to what Messiah is looking for? And how does this relate to eventually serving Messiah? Okay? Because so far we've covered, we need our desire of the heart in its right place. If not, we will serve man in the system. And these things are all about really serving self. Now, obviously, serving self is a real big problem. But serving self, the ability to serve self, was there before the fall. So what's this fall got to do with this? And how does this relate to serving Messiah? Let's leave it there for next week. Let's leave it there for this week, and we'll pick up where we've left off next week. Amen.